Hello, film fans. Welcome to the Film vs. Film podcast. My name is Martin Harries, your host. I'm a filmmaker on occasion, but mainly can't stop yapping about movies. On this podcast, every episode I pick a topic from a film that's coming out at the cinema or on streaming. I pick a favourite film from that topic and battle it out against a guest to decide which film will become the greatest film of all time. If you enjoy this podcast, please leave us a 5-star review and subscribe. Please enjoy part 1. Hello, Podderoonies or Podsters, if you prefer. This episode is an exciting one because arguably the biggest film of the year for me is coming out at the cinemas. And yes, I am correct. It is indeed Dune Part Two, the long-awaited sequel to Dune. And of course, that film was directed by, let's face it, people, the great Denis Villeneuve. I think we can call him that now. So we'll be doing Denis Villeneuve Films 2, as we already have done a Denis Villeneuve podcast in the past. And that one, of course, was Prisoners versus Blade Runner 2049. I think Blade Runner won that one, but it was very tight. Very, very tight. And I think this one will be very, very tight as well. And we have done Arrival in the past with our Amy Adams episode that was up against American Hustle. So do check those episodes out as well. And of course, I am not talking alone. Oh no, of course not. I am joined by another fabulous guest. A new guest to the podcast, Andrew from the Revisionists Almanac podcast, a tongue twister. How are you, sir?
I'm great. You nailed the pronunciation there. We like to test. We like to test people with the name.
Yes, I certainly paused for a moment so I could get that right.
Yeah, it's not. In hindsight, it probably wasn't the smartest decision to pick something really challenging as our podcast name. But we're stuck with it now.
Yeah. So, Andrew, tell us about your podcast and where can we find you?
Yeah, thanks so much again for having me. I'm really excited this is my first guest spot on an Across the Pond episode. I'm from the States, and so it's nice to branch out a little bit over to the UK. So yeah, the podcast is myself and my co-host Adam, and what we do is we look back on past Oscars ceremonies, and we give our revised picks for what we think should have won versus what actually won for those years. And then ultimately we turn the power over to the social media community and we let you vote to decide what you think goes into the Almanac as the true revised winner for each individual year. So that's kind of the basis for our show.
Cool. I guess you're very busy at the moment on social media. I see myself as it is the Oscars coming up. So
yeah, I made a decision to do this little project, what I thought would be a little project. And it has quickly turned into something well beyond my wildest expectations, and so now I'm in the thick of it right now with hundreds of these Oscar ballots coming back. So it's been a fun challenge.
So Dune Part 2, then I'm guessing you've seen the first one. How excited are you for Dune Part 2, sir?
Well, it seems like you're pretty excited. I don't want to say I'm more excited because it seems like you're way at the top up there. I am unbelievably excited for this film. I love the Frank Herbert novel. I've probably seen the original Dune, the 2021 version, obviously not the David Lynch version. I've seen the 2021 version probably 10 or 12 times at this point. It's just one that I've kind of like really ingrained myself into over the last 3 or 4 years. I love it. You kind of tipped on the fact that Denis Villeneuve is arguably maybe right there alongside Chris Nolan as our most important filmmaker right now, in my opinion. Yeah. And so I'm eager to see what he's going to do with this sequel.
Yeah, I mean, I remember seeing Dune Part 1 in the cinema, in an IMAX cinema. Unfortunately, that cinema in Southampton has closed down now, so I won't be able to see it in IMAX, unfortunately. But I remember seeing it, and I've never seen anything that feels so big in scale. The way he achieves that is pretty remarkable in that first film. So I'm pretty stoked about it. I think there is kind of an interesting thing now with how films are marketed in terms of, you know, this film is being shot on IMAX. Well, for a lot of people like myself, and I suspect a lot of others in the UK and in America as well, it takes an awful lot, I think, to get to an IMAX screen. Like in the south of England, like there are like I don't know, 3 or 4 screens just in the south, not even that maybe. So you have to travel a long way. So I think it's great. It's amazing that they are shot on it, but it's a little frustrating at times. But
yeah, we have one here in the city that I'm located here in St. Louis, Missouri. We have one IMAX. It's not the closest to my house, but I did make a point to go to see Oppenheimer there last summer.
Yeah.
And I'm certainly going to do everything in my power to see Dune Part 2. I didn't have the chance to see Dune Part 1 in IMAX, but even on the big super deluxe screen that I saw it was, in terms of scope and size, it's one of those seminal experiences for me in the theater. Just with, I never thought somebody would be able to translate the novel in the way that Denis did. It's just breathtaking to watch.
And regardless of whether like it's Dune, I think Denis Villeneuve and, as you said, Christopher Nolan, like those are 2 big names now where you just go see their film because they directed the movie. It doesn't really matter if you go in blind, you know you're going to have an amazing time. You know, they don't need like huge stars or a big concept or a big IP for people to sell, for people to go see their movie now. You just need their name attached to it. You know, they're that good.
Yeah, I only wish that we could go back like 5 or 6 years and people could have been on the Blade Runner 2049 bandwagon. It feels like that film that's like Denis' great film that kind of flew under the radar at the time. And now everyone has started to get around to it and be like, oh, holy shit, this thing's amazing, you know?
Mm. That is an interesting take because I love Blade Runner 2049. I think it certainly is one of his best films. But I think we'll probably talk about this a lot, but I love like the Denis Villeneuve pacing of his films. They're very deliberate, and that deliberate pace isn't exactly quick. And certainly Blade Runner 2049 is one of those films where it's more deliberately slow than a lot of his others. So I think maybe because that film lost a lot of money, it was a bit of a flop, that maybe Dune and this new one, Part 2, there is some adjustment there for more of a general audience. I don't know, but that's my theory anyway.
I'm also kind of hoping that it feels like people with Oppenheimer being 3+ hours, it feels like people are in the mood again to go to the cinema and see a long film. And so knowing that Dune Part 2 is the better part of 2 hours and 45 minutes, it's nice to see that already the box office is doing really well from what I've seen on like advanced screenings. That gives me a lot of optimism that people have, come around on long films and people are ready to go back to the cinema and see these big, grand, epic scale stuff.
Yeah. So I'm super excited. I think Andrew is as well.
I think when this episode gets released, I will probably be walking into the actual cinema to see Dune Part 2. So if you're listening right now, I'm actually probably in the theater.
Yeah. And also, we are doing a spoiler special with the movie bonus podcast for Dune Part 2. So watch out for that one. That should be out after the week after this one as well. So check that one out. So I'm going to be selfish and go first for part 1. And I went with Sicario mainly because we've covered a lot of Denis Villeneuve's films in the past, and I was like, this is probably one of the best ones we haven't covered yet. Yeah, it's pretty awesome. So what happens in Sicario? Well, an idealistic FBI agent is enlisted by a government task force to aid in the escalating war against drugs at the border area between the US and Mexico. And there's a lot of shady stuff going on as well, especially with Benicio del Toro's character, Alejandro, and he kind of has his own agenda within this main story as well. And I think certainly this one and a lot of other Denis Villeneuve films, they always kind of focus on this theme of having really challenging moral endings. The morality is really challenging always, and I think this is no different. And I think we have that in Arrival certainly as well, your choice. But yeah, what did you make of this one then, Andrew? Initial reactions?
Well, I saw it originally when it came out in 2015, loved it at the time, have revisited it a dozen or so times at this point now over the last 9 or so years. I've always held it in really high esteem personally. I'm not the biggest Taylor Sheridan fan, the screenwriter of it. I think his Yellowstone work isn't necessarily appealing to me. I understand the appeal of it, but I actually think this is probably his strongest work from a writing standpoint. I've always kind of gone back to this film, and I think it really works. When we'll get into this, but I think it really works well in terms of the technical aspect of it, plus the writing and the acting. It kind of all came together in this perfect harmony that made it a film that spoke to me a lot.
Yeah, I think initial reactions for me, I loved it, and I remember I took my dad to see this, and he kind of likes knowing nothing going into a movie, and I was like, "Do you want to go to the cinema? But do you want to like know nothing about it at all? Like not even the title?" So we went in and some woman was in our seats. So I had to show the ticket to this woman, like, "You're in our seats." And she was like, "Seriously?" But I'm like, "You move." So then he knew what it was called. So I was like, that was really frustrating. But yeah, when I first saw this, I really loved it. And again, like, morally, it's really challenging for Emily Blunt's character at the end. I find Benicio del Toro's performance kind of incredible, and certainly like visually stunning as well for me. Some of the cinematography from Roger Deakins is quite remarkable as well.
Yeah, well, I've got a couple of shots that stood out to me, but for my money, I think Deakins is the best cinematographer maybe of all time. Wow. He's in the conversation for me. I think that you could plaster almost any of his frames from the various films he's done on a wall, and it looks really good. Yeah. So did your dad enjoy it by the end of the experience?
He did, yeah.
Okay.
He very much did.
Yeah, that's an intense one to go into for sure, especially not having a clue what you're about to see.
Yeah. Well, he likes things like that.
Okay.
So directing then, I loved the rhythm of how the opening of this film unfolds and just how efficient the shots are. You have like a nice big wide on some FBI soldiers approaching this house, then this amazing shot of inside the house, and you can literally see dust floating in the air in the light of the window. You can also see like the slight shadows of FBI guys in the curtains. It's just such incredible detail in that little shot. Then we have like a few shots of Emily Blunt and Daniel Kaluuya from inside the van. Then like a great POV shot of the van going at speed towards the house, like before we cut to like smashing the wall down. Just great efficient stuff without having like the temptation to establish where we are with loads of different basic establishing shots. Then we have like fairly standard cop military like action stuff with Emily Blunt taking out like the Mexican with a shotgun. But what's really interesting though is that we have this drum beat throughout, and then we keep seeing these dead bodies in the walls, and this like drum beat carries on, and Denis makes them feel quite eerie because we don't just get one reveal shot of them, like here we are, there were dead bodies in the walls. He keeps cutting back to them throughout the rest of the scene with these push-in shots. Like we cut to just like guys throwing up outside, so you get this like sense that the scene isn't over just yet, and then when the drum beat comes back in, you're like, something else is going to happen here, but I have no idea what. But when the rhythm of the scene is so irregular, like with the cutaways and music, you can never really see that explosion coming at the end of that scene. So it's quite an extraordinary opening scene for me.
Yeah, I'm almost in the exact same boat you are. I'm glowing about that opening scene. I think that the first thing you get's that thunderous score, like right off the bat, before you even see anyone enter the frame of the SWAT team, you hear the drum beat come in. And it immediately sets the tone for there's an unsettling nature kind of underlying through the whole current of that opening scene. And I think Denis was brilliant in the way he set that first scene, because from that moment on, you're always concerned about the danger of these characters and what scenarios they're going to end up in. And I think that was a really interesting way he did it. And obviously the bodies that you mentioned, I mean, They even reference that they only found 35 in the 2 rooms they covered. So you get an idea of just the scope of violence already on the frame, and you haven't even seen everything. And he kind of lets you imagine in your mind what else is in that house. It's brilliant direction right out of the gate.
It kind of like lingers in your head, though, the fact that he keeps coming back to the dead body shots.
Yes, and like you said, they get closer and closer each time.
Yeah, and in some ways you're like, is this supernatural? What's going on? I don't understand.
and the way he frames that the explosion where your POV is right behind Blunt's shoulder and she's looking through the window, and I don't know, everything about it.
You're still inside, aren't you?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you understand that Kaluuya's character is kind of aware of something that's happening over there, but you're behind Blunt, and immediately, we'll talk about this more, I'm sure, but he's setting a tone right away that the POV is behind Emily Blunt. You're sort of seeing things through her eyes right out of the gate, and I think that's a really smart decision on the directing.
I love the sequence where this joint task force with our trio, Emily Blunt, Josh Brolin, and Benicio del Toro, travel across the border to Mexico to get the cousin of the drug lord cartel leader. Like the moments where they get stuck at the border are incredibly tense because we pretty much stay in the cars like the whole time. There's only a few shots where they take us out of the cars and focus on the Mexicans in their cars. And when the gun fire does start, it's so quick and intense that it's almost as if it's over before it gets going, kind of thing. And then you get the surprise of Emily Blunt, who stays in the car with a guy lining her up from the back, but she takes him out. But I think what makes the scene so great is everything that has like happened before the gunfight. There's so much attention on like the car convoy going into Mexico. Like the shots are so slick with this drum beat again, with the music. Plus when we get like big wide shots, man, they are big, like showing off like the vast slums, so it just immerses you in this dangerous city before the gunfight. This goes on for what feels like a good 5-10 minutes. In other films, you would only get literally like a few shots of these characters traveling until you come back to the bridge or whatever. But yeah, I think all that atmosphere building and you soaking it up just really adds to the tension on the border crossing.
Oh, absolutely. And even before that, when you're seeing through the POV of Emily Blunt's character, she's been misled about exactly where they're going. She thinks they're going to El Paso, Texas. Then you find out, obviously, that they're going a lot deeper than she had anticipated them going into. And Benicio's character shows up on the plane. There's just this great mystery that Denis kind of slow playing. And it sort of reminded me, the comparison I would think is like a pot of water boiling on a stove. He's slowly turning the temperature up throughout the film. And that, I think it's about 10 minutes. I think you're kind of spot on there, where they go in. I love that shot of Emily in the car or in the convoy, and she's looking a block over and seeing that taxi following alongside them. All of a sudden it disappears. And so again, you're sort of feeling the tension increase. And then Denis wisely, I think, shows you inside the red Impala when they're stuck in that traffic jam. And you can, for the first time, you see someone else has sort of weaponry on the task force. And so you're immediately, kind of on the edge of your seat expecting something to come, because Denis finally allowed you to see something the characters don't at this point.
Yeah, it's such a good spot there with like when Emily spots that cop car, because you have that line where one of them says, "Oh, don't trust the state police." So you're like, okay, is this car with them or are they not? Or is this kind of like Silvio that we keep going back to with his scenes? So that's kind of an interesting little scene there that kind of adds to this growing tension for sure.
And like you said, once the violence hits, it hits so abruptly that you're not allowed to like catch your breath. You're anticipating it, but the score and everything's so harmoniously working together that it's almost like a gunshot. It comes so quickly that it takes your breath away.
After you kind of know everything that's revealed towards the end, that Alejandro has been like working for the Colombian cartel and the Americans are just like using him as a blunt instrument to take revenge on like the top Mexican drug lord, Fastio Alaron, I think that's how you say it. And we just stay with Benicio del Toro's Alejandro, and it's this incredible like Denis Villeneuve slow pacing that I spoke about at the top of the show, where he draws everything out. Like every moment feels important to Alejandro in the back of the cop car with Silvio, and when we see Manuel Diaz's car show up on the road, every shot of the characters like in the cars after they have stopped feels very tense. Like for me, with Denis Villeneuve, in that sometimes he just makes you feel on edge and uncomfortable because he simply hasn't cut to the next shot yet. You know, when people get shot, it feels so impactful. Like with these quick cuts, especially when he kills the security guys at Fausto Alvaron's mansion, it's all done almost like a jump scare, but it's just very simple direction executed extremely well with very deliberate pace. I also love the fact that Del Toro kind of shoots the drug lord's family off camera. You know, the shots just stay on Del Toro and Julio Cesar Cedillo, who plays Alcaron. For me, like, Villeneuve just recognizes that to get maximum emotional impact from that scene, we just need to stay on them now. We don't need to see them get killed. So
yeah, again, like kind of referencing back to the first scene, what you don't see and you have to make up in your own mind is almost more dangerous to setting the story. You know, you can only see so much, and you have to piece everything together with your mind. And I also just think the way that Denis in that third act turns the POV for the first time, where you're basically following Emily through the first two acts, and you're sort of along with her discovering things as she's discovering them. Once you find out that you're actually following Del Toro in that third act, everything takes on a whole new meaning, because again, the way Denis cuts and edits and shoots, you're also getting the reveal from Brolin's character to Emily Blunt's character about exactly what Del Toro's full backstory is with his family. It's just brilliantly put together and constructed by Villeneuve.
Favorite shot or scene for you, Andrew? What are you going for?
It was hard to pick one because I like almost everything. Everything with that Deacon shoots just looks, like I said, a picture on your wall. The one for me that stands out in terms of visual beauty is when the team's about to go into the tunnels.
Yeah.
And it's that great night shot and the silhouettes with the sun going down. It's really a special image to see, captured.
Yeah, I can imagine the patience with that to get that right, because you've got to wait for blue hour. I think that's what they kind of call it, just after the sun goes down. Like, you have a little bit of light left. I think they call it blue hour. Yeah, it just looks great. And like just the symbolism of that as well, that they're all kind of going into the criminal underworld as their silhouettes go into darkness.
It sort of feels kind of alien it sort of has this science fiction element to it, where they're going somewhere where they have no idea what they're about to encounter. It's really an interesting way he shoots that.
Yeah, that's definitely my favorite shot as well, and kind of that whole scene is kind of great, but that shot is truly gorgeous. Arguably, like, Roger Deakins' like best shot he's ever done.
It's in the conversation. It sort of reminded me of, I don't love the film, but he did Jarhead as well. And there are a few shots that are similar like that, where he's sort of using the desert landscape with some sun setting. It kind of harkened my mind back to that. But it's in the conversation for his best visual work.
Yeah. And the score is at its best here too, with that amazing guitar for me. And then when the soldiers like walk around and go into the tunnels, we get like the green night vision of Reggie and Kate, which is slightly grainy. And I think to indicate that their tech isn't as advanced as the Delta guys using their like thermal imaging goggles. That's all like black and white negative film almost, even though I don't think it is really, but that's the kind of feel you get. There's only like a few occasions when like Denis Villeneuve chooses to go back to like natural light, but I loved like the one where this one soldier whips out his knife and holds it out in silhouette up against like the blue light of the tunnel's entrance, and he just walks down the tunnel like that. So cool for me. I was like, that is really good as well. Then when we go back to normal light, as there's now like lights in the tunnel, we go into the action with the gunfire, and like in some ways it's just as disorientating as before with all like the night vision stuff, like because we just see Americans shooting and we never see anyone being shot. So there's no real like structure to the action, which I love, because it just makes the reveal of what Alejandro Benicio del Toro's character is doing the more shocking and less predictable, especially both times like he shoots the drug dealer by the car and Kate Mesa, Emily Blunt, in her bulletproof vest. So it's just really interesting how that scene is constructed in the first place. It just has this very disorientating feel, even though, because you're very much with Emily Blunt's point of view through most of that scene. So it does have this very disorientating feel.
Yeah, I'm glad you picked up on that as well. I thought it was really, when you first go down the tunnel and it switches to that thermal sort of negative look, the sound design is really captivating because, like you said, you're not seeing the action, you're only hearing audibly, people being taken out, screams. It sort of has a horror element to it. It sort of feels like The Descent or something to that degree, where it feels like they're going into this really dark place that it just, again, it puts you on edge. Denis just slowly turning up the temperature on that boiling pot of water, but something's coming. And yeah, the sound design there was really something that caught my attention.
Yeah, I can't watch The Descent anymore. Too scary for me.
One of the scariest theatrical experiences I've ever had, for sure.
Yeah. Oh God. Damn it, Andrew.
Good luck sleeping tonight, Martin.
Yeah. Thanks for that. So, directing score, Andrew, what are you going for? You may use a decimal place.
I'm so glad you've got decimal places. To all of your past guests who don't like them, I'm very much pro decimal. So thank you for that.
Excellent.
I've got an 8.5.
Okay.
I went pretty high with it, but I think that at this point in Denis' career, he'd already knocked out 4 or 5 films, and I think he was close to reaching. I think he's nearing his peak as a director, and I think this was the one that started to turn up that level a little bit. I thought 8.5 was a strong number to show that he did a lot of things that I don't think a director with lesser skill would have pulled off. So I felt pretty confident with an 8.5.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I might go a little bit higher in like an 8.8, because I think this is definitely one of his most visually inspiring films. Because there's certainly things that we didn't mention. That there's some of the shots are kind of very emotionally cold. You're very distant from the emotion. Some of the emotional stuff. Like I remember, like at the end of the border crossing, like Emily kind of loses it a bit with Josh Brolin, but like we are really far away. And then during the torture scene with Benicio del Toro with the water, we don't really see a lot of that. We just see the initial parts of him like standing really close, and then we just have a shot of the drain.
Brilliant directing again there.
Yeah. And obviously Roger Deakins' cinematography is kind of frankly gorgeous at times, as we've spoken about. So yeah, 8.8 for me.
I didn't want to go too high, so I thought 8.5 was comfortable. Yeah, so I'm glad you went a little higher than me.
Okay. So screenplay then, I find it really interesting that we kind of are thrown into this world with very little context of what's actually going on. Like a lot of the information about what is going on is withheld from us. And that's exactly the case with Emily Blunt's character, Kate Mesa. Like she's learning as much about what's going on as us watching. In the briefing scene before they get Guillermo, we're just kind of dropped into it. Like even scenes without Kate Mesa, we're just dropped into this like torture scene. We don't really know what information they're after. And when they get to this bus station, we have like little to no idea of what's going on. But there's a point where Kate Mesa and Reggie, Daniel Kaluuya's character, have had enough, frankly, at this bus station and say, we want to know what's going on or we walk. So then Del Toro says that they're trying to like find information about this tunnel the cartel is using that will lead them to like the head of the cartel, and says to find him would be like discovering a vaccine. You understand the value of that? Then Reggie says, all right, we're good. Just don't keep us in the dark. You're afraid of the dark? So it's like, we're going to tell you what you need to know, but if you want to know everything, you're not going to like it. Plus, I don't mind it that the story is very held back, because I think the questions that the film is asking are interesting enough to carry you through, and the amazing acting kind of has a lot to do with that as well. So certainly the film asks a lot of questions and is holding a lot of stuff back, but it's still incredibly engaging.
Yeah, I find the screenplay to be strong. If you're just talking about words on paper, I don't know if it does so much in terms of differentiating itself from some of the other films in a similar genre. But when you talk about some of the character reveals, which I think goes a lot towards Denis more than it actually does the screenplay, I'm fascinated by the 4 leads, because with Blunt's character, like you said, when she's sort of kind of having her moment of frustration towards the end with Brolin, you're pushed back on the camera, and I think it's the sense that she's a lone female in this very male-oriented world.
Yeah.
And there's a very much an isolation feel to her character where she's sort of on her own. And Daniel Kaluuya, when he's there, he's sort of her safety net in a lot of ways. And there's a period of time in that first act once she gets called to the task force that he's not there. And you can really feel her angst increasing. And then when Kaluuya comes back towards the end, it kind of lightens a little bit. And then with Brolin, I love... he's got this shit-eating grin through the whole movie that is just like, it's so perfect because he's smug and you know that he knows more than everyone and he knows that. And I love that you don't always trust that he's telling the truth even when he says he's telling the truth. And that's some wonderful acting right there.
And I hate flip-flops generally. So anytime I see a guy wearing flip-flops, I'm like, put your feet away. What are you doing?
I'm glad they didn't leave that shot too long, or Tarantino might have lost it in the theater.
Yeah. But yeah, that's just kind of an interesting like character design when you first see him. Like he's extremely casual in this meeting about an extremely tense situation that's escalating, and Brolin is just has no uniform on and with flip-flops. You're like, who the hell is this guy? I don't want to trust him right now.
Yes, and I saw Brolin do an interview when they were filming, or right after they did the filming of it, and he said that even though we never see the character outside of his work life, he said that he sort of looked at the character as someone who could separate very easily his work life from his family life and sort of could detach the two. And I thought that was an interesting thing for Brolin to say, because I can see that in the character where he's so relaxed in the world that he's in because he can compartmentalize the two from each other.
And it kind of feeds into this kind of theme that we discovered towards the end, that like this is kind of quite a lawless area that they're in now, a lawless situation. So he's just kind of like, I have the power to kind of basically do what I want to reach my objectives.
I'm curious, just from like a UK standpoint versus an American standpoint, is the sort of the Mexican drug trafficking world something that you're as familiar with? I mean, for us here, it's something that we're kind of used to. Like that story is not uncommon to us, but I'm curious how it kind of translates over on the UK.
I mean, I don't think we have that many like British filmmakers that kind of focus on that type of story. I think we do have our own drug trafficking stories in London and things, in Liverpool especially. But yeah, I think it's just of what the American output is like in films and stuff, really.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of friends who are of Mexican descent, and a lot of them come from tough parts of the country, like Guadalajara and other places, and have seen a lot of this violence firsthand. And in talking to them, I was really impressed with the level of realism that the movie pulls off. It doesn't feel heightened or fictionalized in a lot of ways, even though it's incredibly violent and brutal. It feels very authentic to, unfortunately, what that world is. And I was impressed by that.
Right. Yeah, it certainly feels authentic. I think that the film does an incredibly good job of just immersing the audience into this world on both sides. Like roughly at the halfway point, like Kate Mesa has very much been like along for the ride and has been told to just watch and learn. She's very much a passive protagonist, but she's also like learning that what she's getting involved with just doesn't feel right, and she's just not sure what the rules are anymore. So she just decides to take things in her own hands in the bank scene, where like Brolin decides to freeze the cartel's money to make him like nervous, so that Manuel Diaz will go back to Mexico so they can follow him to find the head of the cartel, etc. Like the plan seems to go smoothly, but Kate decides to go in the bank to make something stick for an arrest, and it fails seemingly without consequence. But what's interesting is when Kate leaves a meeting with her boss, we see Benicio del Toro in his car watching her and Reggie leave, and he's like kind of sighing, like, what have you done here? So then when Kate is like fooling around with John Bernthal's character, he has the same bracelet on, that he takes out of his pocket that the money smurf has in the bank. So you immediately know that John Bernthal is involved with the cartel, but who turns up to save the day, Benicio del Toro. So it's like if Kate plays by the same rules that she knows, she's going to get mixed up and get in trouble. So now not only has the rules changed, the old rules don't apply now for Kate. And yet Brolin and Del Toro take advantage of that mistake anyway.
Yeah, that whole sequence is just absolutely incredible, and couldn't pick a better person to cast than John Bernthal, who just brings intensity immediately with his presence.
That wasn't exactly the plan for Brolin and Del Toro to like torture John Bernthal, but they're going to weed him out anyway. So that was kind of interesting. So Kate Mesa just never knows where she kind of stands with the rules of engagement. You know, it's just a really interesting dynamic that she's found herself in, that she just doesn't know where she stands.
Yeah, and you know, the hair and makeup department doesn't get a lot of credit in this film, but when you look at the way that Emily Blunt's character physically looks as the film goes on, especially in this particular point in time, her hair's a little greasier, her makeup's a little more worn. She looks thinner and more emaciated. Everything about the stress of what you've just described is physically showing, represented on her face. And I thought that was a really a small, subtle thing that you kind of see, but they don't talk about it a whole lot.
Well, Reggie didn't he say, "Oh, is that the same bra you're wearing or something?"
Yeah, he mentions that in the bar to her. Yeah,
like, why don't you get something nice and lacy? I'm like, okay, steady on, dude.
And that's the great part about Kaluuya's character, and just Kaluuya as an actor with his charisma is he comes in and the tension's been rising and rising, and then when he arrives, you sort of feel. It's false, but you feel a little bit of a coolness in terms of everything's going to be a little bit better because he's there. And then right after that, the big fight scene happens. And so I thought that was a really fascinating editing, directing choice, the way they kind of they weaved up and down in terms of how you felt comfort-wise, as Emily Blunt's character felt that as well.
The decision for Kate Mesa to carry on with the mission, knowing she's being used to make it legal, is really interesting to me from a moral standpoint. Like all she says to Reggie is that she just needs to know. She just needs to know what's going on. When they're like suiting up in the back of her car, at the boot of their car. But I think she just sticks with it and just carries on because she just can't let go of her own morality. Like, she wants to keep hold of that and maybe retain some hope that she can use it to make this situation right and arrest the cartel in the right way by the book, even though she very well knows the odds that are massively stacked against her. And yet in the end, technically, because of a bit of paper, it was done by the book. So I mean, that could be something that's a slight criticism of the film, that what's her motivation that's keeping her to carry on with this story, because technically she is volunteering. She can walk away. There's no reason why she can't. But when you get to the end of the film, you're at that point when she does decide to carry on, you're I don't think they would let her walk away anyway. So I think Benicio del Toro might end up in the back of her car with a gun pointed at her and be like, you're not going anywhere. We need you.
Yeah, if not for his saying that she sort of reminded him of his daughter, you get the strong sense that he would kill her at a moment's notice. But I kind of feel like she's the only character that he has any sort of softening towards, and they sprinkle it throughout a little bit.
So do you think the motivation for her is strong enough to carry on with the mission?
It's a good question, and I was wondering that myself, and it took probably the third watch over the last week to kind of click for me that there's one scene in particular when she's sitting on her laptop and she's sort of scrolling through pictures of all the various, images of violence in the area, and I think that particular scene didn't feel in place the first couple of times I watched it, and I think that scene specifically is there to just reinforce to you that she knows that she has to power through this because she's sort of trusting Brolin and Del Toro's characters that they're going to sort of cut off the head of the snake, if you will. Whether or not that's actually going to prove fruitful or if it's just going to create this vacuum in the world is a whole other moral conundrum, and sort of something that the American government's been dealing with for decades and decades with, their own borders and stuff. But I bought into the idea that she felt compelled to stick through the mission.
Yeah, I felt the same way, that she felt compelled to stick through the mission, but also kind of knowing that this isn't really going to end well for her. She wants to find out the answers, but like I think she knows, like heart of hearts, that she's going to get herself in trouble.
Yeah, and there's the great line, and you have favorite lines coming up, so I won't spoil it. But there's the great line at the end that Del Toro says to her that kind of proves that she's not in the world that she needs to be in anymore, and she needs to go elsewhere.
So we're at that point. So favorite lines, interesting lines. What have you got for me, Andrew?
Well, I've kind of teased it, so I might as well go with it.
Yeah.
I think that great line that Benicio says at the end is, "You are not a wolf, and this is the land of wolves now." And I think that is so on the nose, but also really strong writing, that she is not equipped to handle what it takes to live in this world day to day, mission to mission, and she needs to quickly get out of it. So that's obviously for me the line that stood out to me more than anything else. And really quickly, I also want to just mention, it's not a line of dialogue, but you had referenced when they're sort of roughing up John Bernthal's character.
Yeah,
nothing gave me more pause for laughter than the Benicio del Toro Wet Willy, or whatever you may call it over in the UK. It's so disgusting and gross, and it feels like a spontaneous thing that may have happened on set, but it makes me laugh because of how, I don't know, just the thought of that's so gross, but it's a great torture tactic, I thought.
Yeah, you feel like this guy knows exactly how to hurt someone. It's kind of scary.
Yeah, exactly. And it also reminds you in that previous torture scene with Guillermo, when they slow pan in on just the drain. Again, it forces your mind to think, what is he actually doing to this person that's way worse? Whatever you're coming up with is probably way worse than what's actually happening.
Yeah, exactly. I've got a few, like, leave Fiji alone, terrorists, is a funny one as they're approaching the border. You okay? She's fine. I didn't ask you, and yet I answered, between Reggie and Josh Brolin's Matt was good. A funny one, I think when they get to the bus station, one of the guys says, "How's the auditor going to react to an $8,000 check to fucking Domino's Pizza?" Is a funny one. And then some really kind of dark ones from Benicio del Toro, like at the end when he meets the Alcaron at his mansion. He says, "Every night you have families killed, and yet here you dine. Tonight should be no different." That was a super chilling one for me.
Yeah, and I think Benicio, right before he ends up killing the whole family, he says something along the lines of prepare to meet God, or something to that effect. And I thought that was a really, really strong, haunting line.
Yeah, and also I would recommend not standing on balconies for a while, Kate.
That's a good one.
And yeah, I think my favorite line is yours as well, where Benicio del Toro says to Blunt at the end, "You should move to a small town where the rule of law still exists. You will not survive here. You're not a wolf, and this is a land of wolves now."
It feels like about the best thing Taylor Sheridan's ever written as a single line of dialogue. I think that's a really strong piece, yeah.
So screenplay score, Andrew, what are you going for?
This will be my lowest score of this particular film. It's not a low score, but I went 8.4, just a touch below directing.
Right.
I think the screenplay is really strong, but I think that the directing, and as we get to acting, I think there other areas make this film a little better than just the screenplay. I think if you give the screenplay to somebody else, different director, a different group of actors, it doesn't turn out as well. I think that it took Denis and the acting crew to elevate the screenplay to an 8.4 for me.
Yeah, I think the screenplay is really, really good still, really solid. I'll probably go like an 8.6. Yeah, I think it's definitely one of the stronger Denis Villeneuve films where the morality of this situation is really tough, and he explores that really well throughout, and just how like Benicio del Toro's character is written, like how mysterious he is throughout most of this film, and it never really feels like info dumps at the end. It feels very necessary that we're learning this information at this particular time, like after that tunnel raid. Yeah, so good. And I just love this idea that we're certainly through the first half of the film, that the information is being really deliberately withheld from us. We're very much in Emily Blunt's eyes.
I would have loved to see the original screenplay for it because, by all accounts, a lot of the dialogue that Del Toro originally had got stripped back or moved over to Brolin's character, which obviously adds to the mystery and the vagueness of his character, which works really strong in the film. But I would be curious if the original version where Del Toro's maybe talking more would have negatively affected the way his character comes off as so menacing.
So acting then, like when we first see Josh Brolin for the first time is great, where he's just smiling and obviously wearing those god-awful flip-flops. And Victor Garber is like not happy in a few moments. And you can tell right from that first meeting that something's dodgy, that something dodgy is happening here. Yeah, it's just quite a really engaging first opening meeting there.
Yeah, I mean, really when you look at the acting portion of the film, I think this is also kind of a hallmark of Denis Villeneuve's films in general. He has a really strong knack for building a strong ensemble of what feel like all-star actors, and none of them feel out of place to me, at least to this point in his career. It feels like they all have strong chemistry together. There's a decision to hire the best person for the job as opposed to just taking a big name actor for X position. So it feels like, I feel like when I look at the acting group of Sicario in specific, every actor decision was really meticulously made on the casting decisions. Del Toro specifically, I think this is maybe his best work as an actor. It's in the conversation.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I mean, I love the first moments as we see Benicio del Toro's character, Alejandro. Like, we see Emily Blunt get on this, like, private jet, and she sees, like, Del Toro under the plane slightly, obscured, which to us watching is quite an odd feeling anyway. Then when they're, like, in the air, he, like, falls asleep, and his wrist is shaking, and he suddenly wakes up from what seems like a nightmare. What's interesting as well with like the sound effects of the jet plane sort of like merge with these like screaming people as he's like sleeping. So you can imagine that he's having a nightmare. But what's also interesting is that for such an intimidating guy in this film, our first proper scene with him is a really vulnerable moment. So it's like the film is telling you right from the off that this could be personal for his character in some way. Yeah, that's just a great opening little scene for Del Toro.
I also love in that plane scene that you specifically mentioned, while Del Toro and Blunt are doing what they're doing, as you mentioned, the whole time Josh Brolin is like sleeping on the couch, just completely relaxed. He's even like sort of audibly dreaming about stuff that's unrelated to what's happening in the scene. Just sort of touches upon Brolin as this smug character, which I could buy him being that in real life. I'm sure he's not, but he's just really good at playing an asshole.
Yeah. And again, like Del Toro and Julio Cesar Cedillo, who plays Alcaron at the end, are kind of amazing. And you have Del Toro, he's been very emotionally cold throughout all of this film. And you just get this incredible sigh from him, like after he's killed his family. Like he's just had no satisfaction, or it's just a huge weight off his shoulder that he's just done this. And then when he's about to kill Alcaron, like that's the moment where he looks angry, that he looks genuinely emotional, whereas throughout pretty much the whole of this film there's just nothing there, it feels like. And then with Julio Cesar Cedillo, he kind of goes from being pretty scared but then is very calm, like he's seen this shit before, like he is not worried. But then when his family gets shot, he's just like, holy shit. He looks so vulnerable.
Yeah, and he sort of like backs up in his chair a little bit. That's a really great point out by you, that, you know, he's seen a lot of terrible things and done and committed and you know, forced other people to commit a lot of terrible acts, but to see that happen to his own family just jars him in a way that's really interesting. And I'm glad you picked up on the subtlety of the way Benicio lets out that sigh, because I think that is a really strong point to the acting ability of Del Toro, who I think is a really strong chameleon as an actor. I don't know if everyone agrees with me, but I think he can really play a lot of different roles throughout his career, and I lose Benicio in his roles because I think he brings the character to the forefront.
He is such an incredible actor, yeah. I mean, I love the acting from him and Emily Blunt in that last scene in the hotel room. Like, Del Toro is as cold as he's ever been in the film, and Emily Blunt is as emotionally vulnerable as she's ever been in the film. And at this point, we know that Del Toro will not hesitate in pulling the trigger on anyone. So I found it really powerful when he's like describing that she looks like her daughter as a child, but Blunt is like crying and he's got his gun pointed at her. But in the other hand, Del Toro is comforting her and wiping away her tears. It's like he's only doing it for his own gratification. Yeah, it's just an incredible, like, emotional dynamic for him, especially even though he's literally hardly doing anything with his face. I mean, I could literally watch the guy make tea and be captivated by the guy. He's an incredible actor, yeah. Watchable in anything.
Absolutely. But when he needs to turn the dial up, like for instance in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, if he has to be wild and bombastic, he's capable of that. But he has there's this underlying danger to him, whether it's his eyes or his body language. But I feel like Benicio has seen some shit in his life for real. Yeah. It just feels like he's very real and grounded, and he brings that to his characters. And I did see mentioning that last scene, Benicio said in an interview that they were kind of having a hard time crack that final scene. And Emily Blunt kind of on the spot decided to break down in the way that she did, that it wasn't necessarily in the script for it to go out that way. And I thought that was a fascinating way for two actors in such an intimate moment to turn the film even beyond what the script had on the page. I again, speaks to the acting, which I think is the strongest point of the film, of a lot of good parts of it.
And I think that's the scene that you mentioned as well, Andrew, that Del Toro like stripped away a lot of the dialogue. He was just like, I don't need to say a lot of this. I can do a lot of this on my face. Mm-hmm. That's what I read. Yeah, I mean, Emily Blunt is pretty amazing in that as well. And even the moments after, when Del Toro is walking away and Emily Blunt kind of sort of has a rush of blood and gets her pistol out and aims it at him on the balcony. And you're like, you never for one moment, I was like, there's no way she's going to shoot him. And I think Del Toro is in the same mindset as us. It's like he turns around, not phased at all. It's just like, go on then, shoot me. I know you're not going to do it.
Yeah, and it's all about the camera placement too, where you're sort of looking up at Del Toro. He sort of looks larger than life in that particular frame, where it feels like he, even though she has the high ground physically, it feels like he obviously still has control of the situation, even when he's got a gun pointed at him.
Favorite performance for you, Andrew? Who are you going for?
I mean, I've kind of probably already teased it at this point, but I would say it's Benicio del Toro.
Yeah.
You know, I'm very appreciative that, and we'll talk about this with Arrival on the second half of the second episode, but I think Denis Villeneuve has shown in his career that he writes really compelling and strong female characters, which I appreciate.
Oh yeah.
So Emily deserves a ton of credit. If they had made this film with a male lead in that character's role, I don't think it would have worked as well. I think it was very important that it was a female lead, but I think Del Toro's the difference maker in sort of the mood setting and the tension of the film. Is just the steeliness of his eyes conveys so much to me. So he's going to be my pick, just by a slight nod over Emily.
Yeah, I'm the same. I'm picking Del Toro as my favorite performance. I mean, I could literally just buy a ticket for a film of him just walking down the street, to be honest. The guy is that good.
He's the only thing that made the sequel to this film remotely watchable.
Yeah.
And that's a credit to him.
I've not seen it. I was just like, no Emily Blunt, no Denis Villeneuve, no thank you. So
you probably made the correct decision there.
Yeah. So acting score, Andrew, what are you going for?
Okay, well, I was originally going to go for an 8.8. However, you've talked me into your scoring's a little less strict than I was worried about it might be. So I'm going to go up to a 9.0. I think that
cool.
I think the acting is so strong in this film that it's worthy of being mentioned as the single best part of the entire structure.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the acting is the best part of this film. Yeah, so I will probably go just a 9.1 just to get that extra decimal in there, because it is kind of, as I said, like the three leads are so incredible and so different. Like they're all kind of in this world, but you couldn't have three different personalities there. It's kind of insane. So
yeah, ridiculously good. And then just the whole ensemble, having Kaluuya and Bernthal as sort of the supporting characters. The moment they come in, they can steal a scene at a moment's notice. And again, I think that speaks to Denis' ability to capture the essence of actors and let them sort of do what they do well.
And even some of the like soldiers and Delta guys that have very small moments, they feel very impactful, especially when like Emily Blunt like punches Josh Brolin in the face, and then Reggie kind of joins in, but like the other guy kind of puts him on the ground pretty quick, and he's just like, don't try anything or whatever. He's really good.
And we didn't even talk about the entire Mexican family with Silvio the cop and his wife and his son. I think they do a really good job in their scenes that they're in, and it's interesting to see sort of the dichotomy of what feels like a normal domestic life with such brutal violence happening literally in their backyard. That's fascinating to me.
Right, let's add up the scores then for Sicario. Yep, Sicario gets a very respectable 52.4, which is pretty damn good, if you ask me.
Now, if you don't mind me asking, Martin, what is the current highest rated film on your show to this date?
For this year, because it's only, just going into March, so let's have a look. We have Kingsman, The Secret Service, 53.9.
I love it. What a great choice.
My guests definitely loved that one. And then Akira, 53.5.
Okay, so respectable company for Sicario, a little bit behind it.
That's it for part 1. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. Check out part 2 to see who wins. But don't stop there. Get involved and tell me what your favourite films are relating to the episode. Send us a DM or comment on Instagram and TikTok at Film vs. Film Podcast, for X at FVF_podcast. Plus, we are now on YouTube, so hit that like button and comment there. If you do, I'll give you a shout out on the next episode. Remember, please leave us a 5-star review and subscribe. Pod signing off. Thank you.